Okay, I'm showing a little bit after 6 o'clock. At this time, I'd like to open the special meeting of the Watertown Housing Partnership. The Housing Partnership works with staff, professional staff, and advises the town council on housing matters in Watertown. We are advocates for affordable housing. If I can have the first slide that shows the members of the Housing Partnership. Okay, these are the members of the Housing Partnership, your neighbors, who are the authors of the Watertown draft housing plan for the next 5 years. The other two people I'd like to introduce, who you will interact with this evening, are Steve Magoon, the Director of Community Development and Planning, and Larry Field, Senior Planner in the Department of Community Development and Planning. Larry will present a PowerPoint presentation describing the situation in Watertown and our draft 5-year housing plan. Larry?
Thank you, Fred, and the members of the partnership. I'll be joined by Steve Magoon at some point. I'm also looking to see that everyone's admitted to the meeting. There's someone from cable TV who's also on, and Brian, if you can take over admitting people, that would be great. This presentation will cover 4 major pieces of the draft plan and then discuss next steps. There's more detail than we can cover. The presentation contains 3 types of slides. I will pause at summary slides and provide explanation. The next few slides after each summary are backup, providing supporting information, and I will pass through them. You can read them during or after the presentation. They were all posted online this morning. They are linked on the agenda. I will also pause at highlight slides as they cover specific points that we feel it's important for you to hear. Summary. Watertown demographics. Watertown's population peaked at, in 1960 at 40,000. After several decades of losing population, we are growing again, and we're now around 36,000. We are outpacing many other communities in the region in attracting millennials. They are young now, but millennials are coming into their wage earning prime. We are also, as a community, a little heavier in older folks. That is the 60 plus. We also need to keep in mind the particular needs of those with a disability. That's particularly true for housing targeted to older populations because disability rates increase with age. Watertown, like many communities all over the region, is growing more diverse. The percentage of Latinx, Asian, and foreign-born residents is rising. However, as a community, we are still overwhelmingly white. Summary, housing characteristics. A distinctive feature of Watertown housing is that we have a larger percentage of renters than many of the surrounding communities. In recent decades, we have been a less expensive alternative for people who want to live right around Boston. As the Boston and Cambridge markets have gotten hotter and hotter, That has increased demand here. Our rents and home prices are rising, both because this is a great place to live and because of the regional market. Many can't afford prices at $730,000 for a home or apartments that cost $1,700 a month or more. About 7.5% of our housing has long-term affordability restrictions. I'm going to explain more about that in another slide. People use highlight what is affordable housing. People use the term affordable housing to mean two different things. Sometimes people say they want, quote, affordable housing, and they mean a house or apartment that costs a reasonable amount, but doesn't have any government subsidy or restriction. The draft housing plan uses the technical meaning of affordable housing, which has a long-term or permanent restriction that it be occupied by an income-eligible household. To determine what households are eligible, the federal government uses area median income. If someone is at 100% of area median income, or AMI, they are in the middle. If that person is at, or that household is at or below 80% of AMI, then they generally qualify for affordable housing. Summary: housing cost burden. Housing cost must be measured against income. What percentage of your income goes to rent and utilities, or to all the costs of owning a home? The traditional metric is 30%. 30% of your income being spent on housing. If you spend more than 30%, your housing cost is considered a burden. A significant percentage of renters and owners are feeling that housing pinch. This is particularly true with those who are at the lower income levels. Highlight: HUD 2002 income limits. As previously noted, it's important to understand area median income, or AMI, because it's used to define what households qualify for affordable housing. This chart shows the current numbers numbers that apply to Watertown. It's the Boston region, which is technically Boston, Cambridge, and Quincy. These are the current numbers for the different AMI levels and the different household sizes. To understand what that means in the context of real people, here are two examples. Healthcare support, which employs around 200,000 people in the state, has an average wage around $35,000 a year. So a one-person household that is earning that wage is between 30 and 50% of AMI. Food prep and food service is around $32,000 in annual wages in Massachusetts. A couple who are both working in food prep, and if they have two kids, so it's a household of four, that wage would put them at 50% of AMI. Summary: funding of affordable housing. As noted earlier, Watertown is mainly adding affordable housing through inclusionary zoning. There's less than $750,000 that Watertown controls through the federal home and CDBG programs and the cash in lieu payments by developers. CPA is potentially an important funding source for housing. There's over $7 million currently in our CPA fund, And the CPA revenue stream is likely to add over $2 million a year. But it's important to know that there's a major caveat with CPA funding. There are other important local uses that are eligible under CPA, and that's open space and historic preservation. And the CPA process will be highly competitive with competing applications in each of those areas. Finally, DHCD has a funding round every year. It's highly competitive as well, with the most capable affordable housing developers from all over the state looking for tax credits, as well as grants and loans. Highlight existing Watertown plans. The town's last comprehensive plan was in 2015, and the housing production plan was in 2014. Those plans were finished around the same time and are substantially the same in their goals and strategies. Many of the recommendations in those plans have already been implemented. Two key things that the plans proposed is that the town focus on mixed-use developments with housing and on creating more affordable housing. That is the permanently or long-term affordability housing. Both of those things have happened over the last 6 years. As you all know, the town has seen significant development along the two mixed-use corridors. Obviously, a lot of new mixed-use development, as well as residential in Arsenal, and significant residential along the Pleasant Street corridor. In addition, the percentage of affordable housing in Watertown has increased, mainly through adding over 260 inclusionary units in that time. And inclusionary units are units that are included within market rate developments that have been approved because of the town's inclusionary zoning requirement. Summary, goals and strategies 2001 to 2015. So the draft plan covers a 5-year period starting next year, so 2001 to 2025. And the draft plan is designed to meet the town's overall vision of making it easier for people to live here and stay here in affordable, safe housing. That's not easy because we're in a regional housing market and there are many factors we don't control. The plan proposes 6 goals that we have some ability to implement. I want to describe how these 6 goals fit together, then highlight a few of the particular strategies under some of the goals. Increasing affordable housing for those at or under 80% of AMI is goal 1. Since housing needs are particularly acute for those households that are below 60% of AMI, they are the focus of goal 2. The particular housing needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities cut across many income categories and are discussed in goal 3. The plan also recognizes in goal 4 that the town should have a variety of housing types available at different price points. Not all of these homes will be affordable housing, that is deed restricted housing. But this goal reflects the fact that housing should not be one size fits all, that there are ways that we can provide housing that works for a variety of income levels and provides housing types for different subpopulations in Watertown. Goal 5 addresses the preservation of Watertown's existing approximately 1,200 affordable units. And goal 6 recognizes that community engagement and support is essential to achieving any of the goals. Goal 1, increase affordable housing opportunities for lower income households, less than 80% of AMI. There are 6 strategies for Goal 1. Under each goal, the draft plan proposes specific strategies. Next to each strategy on the series of slides you'll see is a time horizon, near term, midterm, long term, or ongoing. The overall timeline, as I've said, is 5 years. The proposed timeline for each strategy reflects the partnership's sense of urgency on a particular item, as well as the degree of difficulty in implementing it. Ongoing means that a continuation of an existing strategy is what the plan proposes. So I'm going to highlight 2 aspects of Goal 1. How do we measure progress? And what is the primary tool for creating more housing that meets this goal? Highlight, affordable housing target. The partnership felt it important that the plan have some target so that we can measure progress as we go along and at the end of 5 years. It is common for communities to use Chapter 40B's statutory goal, that 10% of all housing have long-term affordability for households at or below 80% of AMI. The plan proposes 15% of new housing as a more realistic goal for Watertown. There are 15,000 plus existing homes in Watertown. So 10% of that number is a far bigger one than 15% of new housing over 5 years. And it's more realistic because it involves 2 particular aspects that we can control. One is inclusionary zoning. The inclusionary zoning requirement for new developments helps us meet affordable housing needs, as the larger ones have a 15% requirement. 15% of the new units must be affordable at different affordability levels. The other way that we can produce affordable housing is by producing 1 or 2 new 100% affordable or mixed income projects over the next 5 years. In addition, there may be ways for us to create individual affordable units. But as far as the large numbers that we can use to get up to a 15% of all new housing, it would be through either inclusionary or larger affordable projects that are created, affordable or mixed income. Highlight, Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. Watertown presently has the 6-member housing partnership. And that partnership proposes policy, reviews inclusionary zoning proposals, and decides how we spend the affordable housing money that we get. A housing trust can do those things and can also be more engaged in real estate activity. The trustees would have real estate and housing finance expertise as a requirement, and the trust can leverage our resources to help get federal and state money for affordable projects that we support. Goal 2, again, increasing affordable housing opportunities, but this is focused on deeper affordability, less than 60% of AMI. Goal 2 is a subset of Goal 1, as all households that are less than 60% are also less than 80%. But there are distinct strategies for this level of median income for 2 reasons. First, there's a larger gap between development cost and income. So it's harder to get developers to include those units in their market rate projects because they have to cover more of the difference. Second, affordable units for households under 60% qualify for federal and state tax credits. And that is a significant and important funding source that isn't available if you are trying to get funding for units that are above 60%. I want to highlight one particular strategy under Goal 2. Highlight, project with deeper affordability. St. Joseph's Hall, which is what's pictured in this slide, was completed in 2014 and is an excellent example of a 100% affordable project that serves households at lower incomes than those who are typically in inclusionary units. Watertown should have a pipeline of projects like this so that we are in position to get a funding award from the Department of Housing and Community Development once, or if we're lucky, twice over the next 5 years. That will require working with nonprofit developers on several sites to see which projects emerge as good candidates for the highly competitive state funding rounds. Goal 3. Goal 3 is specifically for seniors and individuals with a disability. And I want to highlight one of the 4 proposed strategies. Highlight, supportive housing. It is increasingly clear that housing alone is not enough for many seniors and individuals with a disability. They also need delivery of intensive coordinated services. Supportive housing of this kind is basically independent living, but it's with help. It's with service coordination and case management, homemaker services, transportation, personal care. And all of these things, the particular bundle of those services depends on the individual's needs. This just doesn't happen. It needs some intentionality. We need to work with developers and or service providers so that those elements come together in more buildings. Goal 4. Goal 4 is about meeting demand for different housing types and also about households that are above 80% of AMI. Our housing needs analysis shows that there are a surprising number of households with median incomes either at 100% or even somewhat higher, and still struggling with housing costs. Some of these households may qualify for affordable housing. There are programs, and that includes CPA, in some state programs that do qualify those with incomes above 80%. But for most of the people who we're talking about here, we can help not through subsidies or affordability restrictions, but through policies that make it easier for them to find the housing that matches what they need. And in some cases, I should add, it may involve providing direct assistance to allow them to afford the places that they're living in. And that obviously would be, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. Goal 5, preserving the existing housing affordability, is focused on preserving the affordable units we have. It is really 2 different focuses. One is on the units that exist now that we want to preserve, because it's easier to preserve than to create. And then the other focus is on tenants who are in units which they can now barely afford, and we want to try to keep them there because the cost of preserving their tenancy may be less expensive than dealing with the consequences of eviction. Goal 6, increase community engagement around affordable housing. None of our goals and strategies work without residents who support affordable housing as part of the town's vision for itself. And I'm going to highlight one of the 3 strategies under Goal 6. Highlight, discuss local preference. Local preference is a term for giving an advantage in affordable housing lotteries to those who live or work in the community. And by lottery, I'm referring to those instances which are a regular occurrence with affordable housing, that there are far more people who apply than you have units to provide. So you have to have a lottery that picks those who are in line to possibly get a unit. The state must approve a local preference plan because of fair housing concerns. When a community is predominantly white, as Watertown is, there is concern that local preference has the effect of keeping it white. And this can be true even though race is not why the community wants to use local preference. There are good, sound reasons for providing a local preference because it helps those now living or community or working in Watertown. The draft plan suggests that Watertown have a candid community conversation about local preference and decide whether it wants to use it for some or all of its future affordable housing projects. Next steps. Tonight is a major step in the process of finalizing a Watertown housing plan. Tonight you have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments. The Housing Partnership will discuss your comments at its next meeting, make changes, and then send this plan to council. So with that, I'm going to do two logistical things. One is to let you know how to contact us. Both Steve and I. And on the agenda, there's also a link, or actually, well, there is information about how to email me in order to provide written comments. So the forms of comment tonight are that people can raise their hands and participate by asking questions or making comments on the plan. And then, as I've said, if you want to send written comments, you can do that by emailing Steve and I, or just me. With that, I'm going to open it up for questions and comments from the audience. I'm going to be bringing back the slides as needed. Okay. Do we have any opening questions or comments? Okay, John, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can, and I think we all can.
Okay. I don't mean to go first, but nobody else was going, so on your sort of metric of success for goal one, this is just an academic question, but is there a way that kind of goal number becomes a ceiling rather than a floor? You know, that much like with the state 40B, that, you know, some people feel like, well, once you've, you know, met that goal, you know, you're done. You're not at risk of a 40B project. So I'm just wondering what you think about that. You know, is articulating that kind of a goal, you know, does it have a downside?
I think that's a fair question, and I think that's one of the things that the partnership will need to evaluate when it makes its final decision about approving the plan and sending it on to the council. 15% was the figure that was chosen in part because it is a stretch goal. It would take some work to get to 15% of all new housing. And so I would be more concerned with the issue you've raised if it was an easy goal for us to reach, because then we do it and then we say we're done. Councilor, before I call on you, I expected Steve to be on, and I assume that for a technical reason he is not. Fred, do you happen to have contact information for Steve to his cell phone to try him?
Do you want me to try to call him? Sure.
If you wouldn't mind.
Sure thing.
You want to mute while you do that. Councilor Palumba, you're next up.
Well, first I want to thank the partnership and also you, Larry, for putting together this plan. I really enjoyed reading it. It's packed with factual information. I thought I knew a lot about housing in Watertown and statistical information and so forth. And every time I realized I'm continually learning. So and I really do appreciate the time and the energy of the partnership and of you for putting it together. I like the way you laid out the goals and the strategies. So I'm just going to jump into one strategy that jumped out at me. Is it all right to refer to strategies, Larry, that you did not refer to?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I was interested in under the goal 1, strategy 1F, evaluate adding a requirement that developers building new commercial space help fund affordable housing. Can you talk a little bit about what it says long-term. So can you just speak a little bit to that particular strategy and why is the implementations seen as long-term?
Thank you, Councilor. And I should say that the set of goals and strategies were established, at least tentatively, by the partnership before I started work on July 20th. So as much as I'd like to take credit for their work, I won't. What I've done is fill in the detail, which is the role of staff in a situation like this. So to respond to your question, which is a very good one, this approach, which many call linkage, is a link between commercial development and affordable housing. And the theory behind it is that when there is a commercial development, it's creating jobs in your community. And there is the expectation that a number of the people who work at that facility will want to live in your community. And so you're creating housing demand. In addition, there's always a multiplier effect when you've got a significant new commercial development. And so that also creates housing demand. And so the link is between the demand, the commercial development and the affordable housing, without there being a way for the commercial developer to provide that housing. Unlike market rate residential housing, where you can say, well, include a certain percentage of units that are affordable, you can't do that fairly with a commercial developer. One thing you can ask for is money, so that money can be used to create affordable housing somewhere in the community. And there are a number of municipalities in Massachusetts and around the country that have used that tool as a way of addressing their affordable housing needs. Typically, what they'll do is first do a nexus study to establish that that link is not just theoretical, but it is factually supported in the market. And then the second thing we'll do is to set a threshold for square footage that a developer is proposing, and then a price per square foot for their fee, their linkage fee. So that explains what the concept is. Why it was put down as long-term is because it will require time to do a nexus study and to evaluate, come to the conclusion, through the political process of what should be, whether there should be such a fee, and if so, what it should look like. In other communities that have adopted it, it's taken multiple years for that to occur. So it seems reasonable to put that as a long-term goal to evaluate. And I want to conclude that point by saying that it's not, it's something you should not do lightly. It involves a trade-off because you can also deter the creation of jobs in your community if you put a burden that is excessive. And so that's, part of a nexus study is evaluating the effect of a linkage fee on commercial development.
Thank you. May I continue a second?
Sure.
So, thank you. I do think that's great to have linkage. I'm a little familiar with it from Boston. And I do think it is given our community, which let's be clear, we are really standing out as a community where there's enormous amount of commercial development. Every time I turn around and think there's no more space to redevelop, there is yet another large development. And so I hope that we don't wait too long to move forward on something where we should be taking advantage of that development, as not only does it increase our tax base, but the linkage would help with affordable housing. I do want to just again thank the committee, the partnership, for including a couple of things that the Committee on Human Services discussed, including the ADUs and of course the big one up there, the trust, which we really appreciate that, and the tenant assistance program that you included under strategy 4. I just wanted to ask, if I might, on another one of the strategies that you put out, the one on adopting accessory dwelling units under goal 4 strategy 4A, that is considered a midterm. And maybe you could just define what we mean by long-term and midterm, just generally. I don't know if there were some figures you could put to that. And I would assume that no matter whether it's long or midterm or near term, that they'll all stay on this plan and all work on them in one way or the other, even if they take a long time. Are there some general ballparks the committee, the partnership was thinking in terms of years?
So I don't recall that we had any specific conversation about defining each of those time horizons. But I would say that if we're talking about long-term, we're talking about something that's 3 to 5 years. So okay. Certainly by the end of the 5-year period, we would have accomplished whatever the particular strategy is, or at least accomplish, meaning put it in motion. And midterm, it would probably be more like 2 to 4 years.
Thank you. I'll let someone else speak.
Carolyn Bays, Councilor Bays.
I keep raising my hand.
Well, I want to apologize. I was looking at my computer to find out what was going on with Steve, and what Fred was
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
This cell was big. So.
So here's a question. I have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you. You know, looking at that, it's really well put together and you know, very comprehensive. And I was really, like Councillor Palumbo, a lot of the stuff that we had discussed was on there. There were a few things, however, that weren't on there, and I was curious as to why. So for instance, one of the strategies that Councillor Piccirilli had mentioned several times in our meetings was to have the town actually buy into houses in the neighborhood, like just buy individual houses, and just have, like, you know, standing sort of on the, you know, in the budget that we would buy 1 or 2 houses, you know, or maybe a 2-unit or a 3-unit, and then put, you know, make it, you know, affordable housing forever. But the town would own it. And anyway, it was just an idea that I did not have. Councillor Piccirilli had it and had mentioned it. And I just was wondering if you'd thought about it or why it wasn't on the, or if we can do that. I don't even know. We didn't investigate the laws around this. So I don't even know if a municipality can do that.
Right. So we haven't had a specific conversation about that. And I think that's something we could certainly talk about in the context of evaluating the comments that we've gotten. What I would say, to provide some background to you and to others, it is certainly something that a community can do. And there are some examples of communities doing that. The issue with doing it is how expensive it is, and the fact that you're not able to leverage someone else or federal and state funding to do it. The way in which you are able to get the most out of the local money is by using money to attract you know, others to, you know, finish the job.
Very familiar. Yes.
Funding. You know, the development cost per unit might be 500,000, but Watertown doesn't have to put up 500,000. Whereas when you're buying an affordable, buying a property and then turning it into affordable housing, you might spend 450,000 for 1 unit, and it'd be all our money.
Right. Yeah. So that makes sense. The other thing that I noticed, and this is about money, because, you know, I mean, one of the things we discovered when we were looking into this is how expensive housing is. Even if you are getting money from other sources, it's still very expensive. I was wondering if, and I know I talked to you a little bit about this, and I meant to call you back, if you had considered the option of filing for a home rule petition for a transfer fee, which a number of other communities have filed. I've been in contact with several state representatives and state senators, and so far we haven't heard that it's dead. I think what's happened is COVID has just taken over the state house, and that's what seems to be happening. Because I asked, like, do they have a problem with these home rule petitions that these communities have filed, and they said no. It's not that. It's that COVID has just overtaken everything at the state house, and they're just not focused on it. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know that bit of information from the state house, but also that, you know, wondering why that wouldn't also be an option for getting money for affordable housing, and that we could put in as a strategy.
So that's obviously an important question. And I think that reflects the fact that this is a regional problem, and there are regional solutions, and those solutions may work a lot better than, or at least are necessary in addition to whatever a community does locally. I think that implicitly the partnership was focusing on the things that are Watertown goals and strategies, and left out of the plan anything that would involve obtaining funding at the state level. And that includes things like zoning reform, or there are a variety of different home rule petitions or local option things that we could advocate for. I think that there was an implicit assumption that those were things that the council might consider doing, but weren't necessarily something that the partnership would get involved in proposing and trying to implement.
Okay, I mean, okay. I just want to make sure, like, that this would be like you just be filing, it would be an enabling legislation that would just allow us to pass a law that would raise the transfer fee. Okay, okay, I just want to make, okay. So, but you felt like that was out of your wheelhouse for this proposal? Because it feels like that is a strategy that could be in there. Anyway, that's all for fundraising.
We did not have an explicit discussion about that. I was really reflecting the fact that I think there was an implicit assumption by members of the partnership that the scope of the plan should be the kinds of goals and strategies that were covered there. And it's certainly typical in housing plans to focus on the things that a community can do in the kinds of things that are in this plan. I'm not sure I've ever seen a housing production plan, for example, that covers what you could do on a state level. So it's not that it isn't creative and a good thing to consider, but my assumption is that we're all operating under that implicit assumption.
So I have a question. If the state was to pass a bill that just gave us the right to do that, and you didn't have to file for a home rule petition at the State House, would you include that in the plan because it'd be an option to town council? If there was enabling legislation that gave all the cities and towns the right to do a transfer fee.
I'm going to defer to the partnership on that. I mean, that would be something that would go to a partnership discussion, and they would conclude whether they thought that was the kind of strategy that should be included in the plan.
Okay, because there is a bill, and that didn't pass this year, but again, COVID. So it might have just been COVID. It might have been that it wouldn't have passed. We don't know. It's just everything went awry. But just something. It's a 5-year plan. If there was that available, I just wonder if you can revisit that and look at that and figure out if you want to put that into it, if this was an option for the town. If it became an option at the state, the state level did it. We didn't do anything to get it, but it became an option to suggest it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Mark, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, okay. I'm wondering with COVID-19, there seems to be a drop in the rental market, and as a consequence, real estate developers seem less interested in developing rental housing and more interested in developing units for sale. And I'm wondering if that's giving us a sort of mismatch with our inclusionary zoning, in that I think those in greater need or more burdened by housing costs tend to be renters. Yet, if real estate developers are mostly building condominiums for sale, then our inclusionary zoning is going to come up with units for sale, which may not match the needs of those who really need lower rent units. And so I'm wondering whether that's a problem. And I wonder also whether I think the plan is very well written, but I wonder if it highlights sufficiently that the folk who really are in need are renters more than homeowners.
So that's a great question. We're all very interested in what COVID means in the long term. And it is obviously not at all clear, but some of the answers seem to be emerging because as there's more data. I just attended a Zoom meeting where a national firm was talking about the effect of COVID on asking rents, concessions, et cetera. And it's clear that there is an effect, that the market is much softer, but that there is a real difference between the downtown locations, the more urban locations, but not in downtown, and then the ones that are in the suburbs, and then ones that are farther away, like in the case of Massachusetts, the gateway city, and that the market is fairly close to normal in suburban markets, but is taking a real hit in downtown locations. And part of that in some of the cities that they're talking about, Boston, San Francisco, is both people being afraid of using public transportation, or I'm sorry, to some extent it is because employers are doing remotely so that there isn't the same kind of demand for being downtown. For people who are farther away, there seems to be less of a feeling that COVID is changing their lives in that sense. And there seems to be less of an impact on their demand right now for rental housing. So the other factor in places like Boston and San Francisco is the supply of rental housing, because in both of those markets, there's been a lot built and it's coming online, has come online very recently, including a lot of deliveries this year. And that is another factor in why there may be more of an effect right now. So, what that tells us is that it's not clear that if we look 5 years from now, that the rental market in Watertown will be so hit by this, the aftermath of COVID, that we won't see new rental developments. And I would add to that, the ownership side, that the inclusionary requirement obviously does apply to ownership properties as well. And so we may be getting a different kind of affordable unit, but we're still going to be getting affordable units. Councilor Palumbo?
Thank you for, I wanted to just go to strategy 1B, if you could. Evaluate increased inclusionary zoning requirements. I'm glad to see this is on there. I'm glad to see it's a B. I don't know if the ABC means priority or not, but it's nice to see it there. Can you talk a little bit about what or other members of the partnership, what you were thinking in terms of how you would evaluate it and what you were thinking of possibly increasing it? And am I wrong in saying that there are very few communities have 15%, and I believe only 1 or 2 has 20%? what was the partnership's thinking on how high this would go, and yeah, that's it.
I'll jump in. Sorry, I'm late. For some reason, I thought the meeting was at 7, so sorry about that. I actually thought I was a couple minutes early till I got the text from Larry. But I'll jump in on that question. I think before, one of the concerns we had about increasing it significantly was that you would get too close to the 40B threshold of 25%. And, you know, we didn't want to push people into the 40B realm. Obviously, that's not an issue so much now because we've met that threshold and we have safe harbor. So I think it is something we could consider increasing. I think you're right that there's only a couple of communities that are above 15%. So we're definitely not at the lower end of that range. You know, I don't think we should be too casual or too quick to go above that, but it is something that I think that's a potential to look at, and the reason the recommendation says what it does.
Well, I would support it, just to say, I think it's a great idea that you're taking a look at it and evaluating the possibility of doing that. I think we are a community that is very appealing to people, both from commercial and residential areas, and so we should be doing what we can to take advantage of that situation. It may never come again. So anything we can do to increase the inclusionary zoning requirement, even 2% increase, I think would be helpful, and would continue our path of creating housing through linkage, through inclusionary zoning. May I just ask one more question, since I'm monopolizing the whole thing here, but there's a question on maybe on 4C, continue to evaluate current zoning, parking requirements, and other incentives to shape residential development. And wonder if you could just a little bit, and maybe this falls to Steve or any member of the partnership, what particularly are we looking in terms of what kind of zoning change might we be looking at to support affordable housing?
Well, my perspective, I think that was intentionally left pretty broad, that it could be a variety of things. You know, the one thing mentioned was parking, which can certainly represent a pretty significant cost, not only in terms of particularly if it's structured parking of building it, but also in terms of land area. And, you know, if there are opportunities to, reduce that requirement some, that could represent, a path to more affordability. I think there's a lot of other ones that are potentials. And I know we talk about ADUs in a separate section, but, that's another obvious one. That's a zoning related provision that has to do with creating, housing that could be affordable. A lot of times people talk about increasing, creating incentives for adding additional affordable units. And, most often that's adding density, adding height, adding numbers of units. I haven't been quite as inclined to go in that direction for Watertown, just because I think there is a little bit, or at least has been, considerable amount of community concern about the amount of residential projects and their size already. So, I wouldn't say there's been a clamoring for people to say, gosh, we really need to make those projects bigger or more dense. But those are things that we could consider, a variety of things. And I don't, especially since I came late, I don't mean to monopolize the conversation. If any of you guys want to jump in, feel free.
I would add one other. There has always been interest in having more smaller infill projects, and those are are sometimes tough to do. And so trying to find creative ways to promote that kind of development, and that would serve some of our goals in providing, a certain type of housing that we may not be producing as much of right now. Councilor Palumbo?
Thank you. I want to go back to the trust, and I think that is, I think it's ongoing or near term. What is the trust?
Near term.
Near term. I really want to support that, and I wonder. I don't know whether the existing of the trust, whether I assume it would be some combination of existing members, maybe of the housing partnership with some new people. But it seems to me if we had that trust in place, it might have, the development on Galen Street, the old car dealership and that whole development there, that when they talked about that, I was really excited because maybe it would include some housing and it might be right next to transportation. And isn't that one of the goals of trying to get housing related into transportation locations, right? And I don't know, we tried a little bit with some conversation, but that didn't happen and they were pretty clear on what they wanted to do. But I think with the trust, we might have had a little more influence and maybe been able to push a little bit on the developer to consider, using this as a transit-oriented development for housing. And there was another piece of property over there on Elm Street that became a storage facility, and maybe if we had a trust, we might have been able to swing that piece of property. So I'm just want to put out there a real strong push that if that is near term, whatever we need to get the ball rolling on it, I would hope the partnership would pursue it. And I will stop asking questions.
I'll throw in one comment there that I do think a trust makes a lot of sense to pursue, and I think it will allow us to be, a little more nimble in terms of responding to properties. The two properties you mentioned, I'm not sure that would have made a difference. I think it wouldn't have made a difference, but still, I think a trust does make sense, and at the very least, I think it is an effective tool to use in terms of managing resources related to affordable housing projects. So, I think it makes sense for us to pursue that. And if you want to get into why those two projects probably wouldn't have mattered, but I could do that, but. You're muted, Carolyn. I think you said something a couple times.
I just said Tony can talk as much as he wants, and no, we don't need to know why.
John?
Coming back to the metrics, the numeric goal, is that just curious? Is that 15% of new housing? Is that the goal for like all the different types of affordability, or all of the different levels of affordability that are discussed in this plan, or is that just particularly for the 80% of AMI?
Good, Larry.
Yeah, the answer is all types of units with long-term affordability, ownership, rental, and all the different levels. I think as a practical matter, we're really talking about below 80% of AMI, because it's much harder to get those kinds of restrictions to create units that are above 80% of AMI. The funding sources are more limited. Other questions or comments?
Don't see any.
Hi, it's Lisa. I'm sorry, I'm not finding where the raise hand function is.
All right, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah, I guess a lot of this material seems familiar to me, and I guess I'm just wondering, I know affordable housing, it's really difficult, all these things to get going, but given how much growth we've seen and activity and whatnot, I mean, what is your hope that we're actually going to be able to move forward and make progress on these things? Because I don't really see much new from what we've been doing. And so I guess somewhat to Tony's point, I'm a little concerned about timing, that, there'll just continue to kind of be some missed opportunities. So I'm sorry to be kind of a wet blanket. I haven't been to all your meetings. I've made as many as I can and read reports and things like that. But how much urgency really, I guess, is there an ability to really make this a priority? Thanks.
Well, I guess I would respond to that in a couple of ways. One, I think there's lots of things that are different today, and I can tick off a few. Obviously, COVID is affecting everything, but hopefully that'll be a temporary situation. I think our meeting the 1.5% of land area is a major change in terms of the landscape when it comes to implementation of affordable housing. And also the market, and maybe some of that is related to COVID, but the market for residential has cooled significantly, at least, for higher density residential. So that both, affects what's coming in the door, and we have an opportunity to influence and shape and make be what we want it to be. But it also provides us an opportunity to, reflect on some of the regulatory frameworks that we have and, what are the adjustments we want to make. I think the point of the draft that Larry's presented tonight is, trying to make the point that whatever housing we're producing, that we try to make sure that 15% of that is affordable, which is a different approach. And I think will be an interesting one to see how it implements. In terms of making things happen, that are different. Another big one is the CPC, and that has some funding that's going to be dedicated to affordable housing, and combining that with some of the funding sources that we have, and having a trust in place will definitely change the landscape in my mind in terms of what's possible. Time will tell whether it results in differences, but I think that definitely creates the possibility of some real different directions that we could go with affordable housing.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate a lot of the explanation. So I guess I'll pick an easy one. Why 15%? Why not push for more than 15%? We slowly have inched it up, and it just seems like we're not keeping pace. So I'm not. I do appreciate everyone's efforts and understand what you're saying, Stephen. I'm not saying that we should give up, but you can probably hear the frustration in my voice. So anyway, thanks.
Sure, and I'll, I think Larry has some good explanation for where 15% fits. So I'll let him respond to that.
Right. So 15% is a figure which is, on the one hand, something that is realistic for us to achieve, given the different factors. but also is a stretch. And so if you pick 10%, it would be easy for us to achieve that 10% of new housing, because with the inclusionary at 15% for the larger projects, it would, essentially be a slam dunk for us to be able to get to 10%. On the other hand, if it was 20%, that would really be a reach for us, because that would mean that it would either force us to raise the inclusionary percentage, whether it made sense or not, or it would ask us to be creating so many 100% or mixed income properties with so little resources to do it. I mean, if you price out each of these developments, to be able to create, that many additional units, when the limiting factor is state and federal money, it just becomes impractical to, get, beyond a certain point, certain percentage. So, I think that you certainly could look at it and say, well, why not 12? Why not 18? But I think that the farther you go in either direction, the more you're hitting on it's too easy or it's too hard.
And I think, it's good to try and have something that we can try to achieve, as opposed to say, well, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to have 25% affordability? So let's just make it 25, even though, there's little to no hope that we'd get there.
If I could just chime in on this, the 15% is a number, a goal. Nothing prevents us from creating more housing. Absolutely nothing.
It's true too.
Yeah. Councilor Feltner, it looked like you had a question or comment.
No, I appreciate your feedback. I understand all the reasons, I guess. I don't know. It seems like an opportunity, super low interest rates. I guess it'll just be interesting to have more deliberations and look at the big picture. And I'd like to delve more into our more recent data, the demographics of how the town's changed, because I know we kind of kept saying we were waiting for a census, but I know there's a lot of data out there to get a better picture of where we're at now, even just, in the last 5 years. So thanks again for all your work.
Any other questions or comments?
Again, I just appreciations to the committee, the partnership, and to Larry. It really is a fine report. I think it's the kind of report that Councilor Picciarelli expected out of the Human Services Committee. And I'll be very honest, we would never come even close to producing something as comprehensive or as useful. But I appreciate the mention of the work we did for 2 years in the report. And I appreciate the fact that you've taken a few of the key ideas and and put them in the report. So thank you very much.
I want to echo that. I was thinking the exact same thing. This is what we're trying to do, but didn't achieve. So thank you for doing it, because we know how hard it is after all the work we did.
Well, and I think I'll speak for the rest of the partnership in appreciating the work that Larry's put into it. I think it was pretty clear that we were floundering a bit with my half attention to the work, and bringing Larry aboard really let us, focus it and really put together, I think, a good document, and with the help of the partnership too. I don't mean to minimize your guys' input as well, because I know there was major input from you guys, but Larry was really able to pull it together and put it into a document that I think, as you said, really does, provide a clear message about some of that data and where we're going.
Thank you. So as the last part of this agenda, Fred, we were going to open for any concluding comments by members of the partnership. So assuming there are no other questions or comments from others, I will hand this back to you.
Okay, thank you, Larry. I would like to again chime in and thank you for all of your work on pulling this together. Obviously, it was a huge amount of work to put this together. And that's not to detract at all from the housing partnership members, the many meetings and the many discussions that went into this plan. This has been ongoing for over a year to get this together. And we have been consulting with various individuals throughout the town and the state as to exactly what we can or not do. Just before I turn it over to the other members, I just wanted to comment on Carolyn's idea about buying housing, particularly buying individual houses. This is somewhat of an issue for administering it because houses need to be inspected annually and they need to be maintained. The partnership at one point in time did consider the purchase of condos, which would then, at least the maintenance part, would be taken care of by the association. The issue that we ran into was in order for this to be certified as affordable housing by SHI, the individual units had to be brought up to code in terms of the electrical and whatever. And that would not be enough. It would require us to bring the entire building up to code. That is the common areas and the other units. And the cost would be onerous. It would not be possible. So that's where we are with that. It was a good idea and it just didn't quite fly.
Thank you. Thanks for that information.
Are there comments from other members?
Fred, if I might make a comment.
Go for it.
Thanks. I think that Councilors Palumbo and Feltner raised a good point about the trust and the importance of trying to get that in place sooner rather than later as a vehicle to be able to react when the opportunity appears. But I would also point out that in order for a trust to be effective, you have to have a source of income. And it's not completely clear that we would have a source of income for a trust at this time. We do have some money, but unfortunately, given the current market around here, it's not going to be enough to take you very far. Probably even allow us to buy a condominium at this point, given how prices have escalated. So that's all.
Any other comments?
Right, Mr. Chair, if I could just make one comment.
Yes.
I think it's more of a comment as the director of the Housing Authority, but just to Councilor Feltner's point, of having small plot of land where you could build a little bit of housing. It's very expensive, but just so that you're aware, the Housing Authority is investigating our vacant land to see if we can do this. And it's special needs housing that we're actually designing to do a few units. And operating costs is where it gets tricky, but fortunately with our model, we own the land, and a VinFen or a Beaverbrook step could operate the inside. And so just some optimism, I think, as you're saying that, often you'll change your plan, you don't see new units constructed, but the town's done an unbelievable job with inclusionary programming. So we're hoping that the Housing Authority, now that we're getting funded a little better than we have in the past, can actually build capacity to look to develop. So again, the CPC and the CPA is a huge deal. So just kind of want to emphasize that point that Mr. Magoon made earlier.
Other comments? If I could just mention a little bit about how we can best leverage the funds that we do have I personally look onto those funds as seed money, money that can be used to start a project in collaboration with a nonprofit such as Metro West, for example. And by having a trust, we would be able to react quickly in bidding for parcels of land that could be used, or buildings. It could also be a building. And by having the trust, we have the ability to do that. And we would provide seed money into a project, not actually acquire units, just flat out purchase them. The cost of constructing units in this area is in the neighborhood of $600,000 a unit. And that is a lot of money to try to increase the number of, or percentage of units much above the 10%. Do we have other comments? Perhaps I should turn this over to you again, Larry, for your last slide. We have a slide of the members of the housing partnership, and you have the slide for comments again for you and Steve.
Yep. Sorry, it's taking me some time to find it on my desktop. Hold on for a second.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. There we go. So at this point, Fred, we could informally close so that everyone can get on with their evenings. I'll stay on for the next 6 minutes. We'll keep this contact info up so that if anyone happens to get on before 7:30, they'll know how to reach us.
That's fine.
Ryan, if you can stay on as well for the next 6 minutes.
Certainly.
Councilor Palumbo, you want to?
I'm sorry, I didn't see the agenda, Larry, so I apologize. Are you going to be talking about the consortium analysis, or is that at a different meeting?
Different meeting.
Different-
That is December 7.
Okay, I just had some comments on the recommendations, but that's fine.
Okay,
And so
great.
the next step on the plan is to go to the committee, to the partnership, and then from the partnership to the council. Is that the plan?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I hope.
Well, since we have a couple of minutes, if nobody else has any comments, maybe you can fill me in on what I missed since I came late. I obviously saw Larry's presentation before, so I knew what that said. Were there comments or questions before I got on?
Let me just quickly summarize them for you, Steve. So John Bakken asked about the 15% of new housing goal. Could that be considered a ceiling, and therefore that be a downside to having that kind of a goal or that percentage? Councilor Palumbo asked about strategy 1F, which is the linkage fee. He also asked what long-term and midterm meant in the context of this plan. Councilor Bays asked about buying individual homes and about having as a strategy, filing a home rule petition for a transfer fee. Mark asked about the rental market, given COVID and the softness right now in the market, and whether that would have has implications for what strategy should be followed. Councilor Palumba asked about strategy 1B and what particular inclusionary zoning percentage the partnership was thinking about, and that's when you came in.
Well, thank you. Sorry to make you all go through that again.
Good for the recap anyway. If there's an interest in what's going on in Waltham, the community next door to you, the Waltham CPA has voted to allocate $5 million in funding to the project, which is being managed by Metro West, to build 20 units in the old armory. This is a kind of activity that if we were larger, we certainly are a smaller municipality, we could entertain.
Yeah. You don't all have to stay. 2 more minutes.
That's okay.
Keep mentioning, Mr. Chair, the cost per unit. I'll just let you know that we're having the Cambridge Planning Department at their housing authorities under contract and working with us to, investigate and look at some things, and they're pricing it, even with us owning the land, at $500,000 to $600,000 per unit for 2 bedrooms. So not too far off the mark, but again, the contribution from the town could be minimal if we can find a bigger source of funding. Then you're talking only 5% or less or something. It's much more manageable, so.
Right.
Well, before we time out, I just want to also chime in, Larry. Thank you for really shepherding us through this COVID fog and getting us to the end here with the
Yeah.
housing plan. And also, I don't know if Tony's still on, but I appreciate all of Tony's efforts on the Human Services Committee and really trying to, highlight the need for affordable housing in Watertown.
I'll second David on both counts.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I don't think we would be sitting here today without Larry's help.
We would be scrambling.
We would. Looks like it's 7:30.
Yep.
All right.
So Fred, do you want to take control of adjourning the meeting?
If there are no more comments from anyone in the audience, certainly any comments that can be submitted to Larry or to Steve would be appreciated. And at this point, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
We
you.
are adjourned.
Night.
Thank
Good
you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Bye.
Good night. And thank you.